The fluorescent lights buzzed mercilessly overhead as David Martinez sat alone in his cramped Chicago office at 11:47 p.m., surrounded by towers of case files and empty coffee cups. The city's December wind rattled the windows of his third-floor walk-up, a constant reminder of how far he was from the gleaming law firms downtown. At 42, David's weathered face told the story of every underdog case he'd fought, every sleepless night spent digging for evidence that others had given up on. His phone rang, cutting through the silence like a knife. Unknown number. David almost ignored it. Calls this late usually meant trouble, but something made him answer. "Martinez Law," he said, his voice hoarse from exhaustion. "Mr. Martinez." The voice was young, trembling. "My name is Marcus Thompson. I need help. They're saying I killed someone, but I swear on my mother's grave I didn't do it." David had heard this plea 1,000 times before, but something in Marcus's voice made him pause. Raw desperation mixed with genuine fear, not the calculated manipulation he'd learned to recognize in career criminals. "Where are you calling from, Marcus?" "Cook County Jail. They arrested me 3 hours ago, said they found me near the scene, covered in blood, but I was just trying to help the man who was dying. I'm a paramedic, Mr. Martinez. I save lives, I don't take them." David grabbed a notepad, his instincts kicking in despite his exhaustion. "What's the victim's name?" "Robert Kellerman, some big-shot businessman. They're saying it's first-degree murder, that I robbed him and left him to die in that alley." Marcus's voice cracked. "My public defender already told me to take a plea deal, says it's hopeless with all the evidence against me." David's jaw tightened. Another overworked public defender ready to sacrifice a client to clear their docket. He'd seen it too many times. Young men, especially young black men, steamrolled by a system that valued efficiency over justice. "Marcus, I need you to listen to me carefully. Don't say another word to anyone until I get there. Not to the cops, not to your cellmates, not even to your own shadow. Can you do that?" "Yes, sir, but Mr. Martinez, I don't have much money. I heard you take cases like mine, but money's not the issue right now. Keeping you alive is." David was already grabbing his coat, shoving files into his briefcase. "I'll be there in 30 minutes. As he locked his office and headed into the brutal Chicago night, David felt the familiar weight settling on his shoulders. Another impossible case, another young man whose life hung in the balance. He'd been down this road so many times that his colleagues joked he collected lost causes like some people collected stamps. But David Martinez hadn't become a lawyer to play it safe. He'd become one because he remembered being 17, watching his own father, an honest construction worker, get railroaded by the system for a crime he didn't commit. The memory of his father's broken spirit still fueled every late night, every impossible case, every moment when everyone told him to give up. Walking through the empty streets toward Cook County Jail, David didn't know that this case would test everything he believed about justice, loyalty, and the price of standing alone against the world. The Cook County Jail's visiting room smelled of disinfectant and despair. David sat across from Marcus Thompson, studying the young man who would either become his greatest victory or his most devastating failure. Marcus was smaller than his voice suggested, maybe 5'8", with intelligent eyes that darted nervously around the room. His paramedic uniform was stained with dried blood, evidence bags already collected, but the stains remaining like accusations. "Tell me everything, Marcus. Start from the beginning of that night." Marcus took a shaky breath. "I was finishing my shift around 10 p.m. We'd just dropped off a heart attack patient at Northwestern Memorial. My partner Jake said he'd handle the paperwork, so I decided to walk home through River North instead of taking the train. Needed to clear my head." "Why did you need to clear your head?" "My girlfriend Keisha and I had been fighting. She's pregnant with our first child and—" Marcus's voice dropped. "Money's been tight. She wanted me to take a desk job, said being a paramedic was too dangerous, didn't pay enough. I love saving lives, Mr. Martinez, but she's not wrong about the money." David made notes, recognizing the weight of a man trying to provide for his growing family. "Continue." I was walking down that alley shortcut behind the merchandise mart when I heard this gurgling sound. Found a man on the ground bleeding from multiple stab wounds to his chest. My training kicked in immediately. I started applying pressure to the wounds, trying to stop the bleeding. That's when someone must have called the cops. And did you see anyone else in the alley? It was dark, but I thought I heard footsteps running away when I first arrived. Couldn't see who it was, though. Marcus leaned forward desperately. Mr. Martinez, when the police found me, I was performing CPR. My hands were covered in blood because I was trying to save the man's life, but they looked at a young black man with blood on his hands and saw a killer instead of a hero. David's pen stopped moving. The story had a ring of truth that his 20 years of experience had taught him to recognize. But he also knew that truth and provable innocence were two very different things in a courtroom. What did you tell the police? Exactly what I told you. But Detective Morrison, he's the lead on the case, kept twisting my words, kept asking why I was really in that alley, what I stole from the victim. When I said I didn't steal anything, he laughed and said the victim's wallet was missing, his Rolex too, said I probably ditched them somewhere before they arrived. David felt his stomach sink. Missing valuables would make the prosecution's robbery-murder case much stronger. Marcus, I need you to be completely honest with me. Did you take anything from that scene? Marcus's eyes flashed with hurt and anger. Mr. Martinez, I've been a paramedic for 6 years. I've held dying people in my arms, watched families get the worst news of their lives, worked double shifts for barely enough money to survive, but I've never, not once, compromised my oath to help people. I would rather die than steal from someone I was trying to save. The conviction in Marcus's voice resonated with something deep in David's chest. He'd learned to trust his instincts about people, and every instinct screamed that Marcus Thompson was telling the truth. But the evidence against him would be overwhelming. I need to be straight with you, Marcus. The prosecution will paint a picture of a desperate young man, struggling financially, who saw an opportunity and took it. They'll say you robbed Robert Kellerman and killed him when he fought back. With you found at the scene covered in blood, no witnesses to support your story, and missing valuables, this case will be an uphill battle. Marcus's shoulders sagged. So you think I should take the plea deal too? David looked at the young man across from him. Someone's son, someone's boyfriend, soon to be someone's father. He thought about his own father, about all the men who'd been crushed by a system that preferred convenient conclusions to inconvenient truths. No, Marcus, I think we're going to fight, and I think we're going to win. 3 days later, David stood in the Cook County Medical Examiner's office, staring at photographs that made his blood run cold. Robert Kellerman's body told a story that didn't match the police report, and Dr. Sarah Chen, the forensic pathologist, was happy to explain why. See these wound patterns. Dr. Chen pointed to the crime scene photos with clinical precision. The angles are all wrong for someone of Marcus Thompson's height attacking from the front. These stab wounds were inflicted by someone taller, probably around 6 feet, and the trajectory suggests the attacker was left-handed. David's pulse quickened. Marcus is right-handed and 5'8". This completely contradicts the prosecution's theory. That's not all, Dr. Chen continued, pulling out additional photographs. Look at the defensive wounds on Kellerman's hands. These cuts are deep, consistent with a prolonged struggle. But there were no corresponding injuries on Thompson's hands or arms. If he'd been in a knife fight with a man fighting for his life, he'd have cuts, bruises, something. David studied the images, pieces of a puzzle beginning to form in his mind. What about time of death? Based on liver temperature and rigor mortis, Kellerman died between 9:30 and 9:45 p.m. Thompson's ambulance logs show he was still at Northwestern Memorial until 10:15 p.m. The timeline doesn't work. This was the break David had been hoping for, but it also deepened the mystery. If Marcus didn't kill Robert Kellerman, who did? And why was the police investigation so determined to pin it on him? That afternoon, David sat in his car outside the River North Alley where the murder occurred, studying every detail. The crime scene had been released, but yellow tape remnants still clung to the brick walls like desperate memories. He walked the exact path Marcus described taking, timing each step, looking for security cameras that might have captured something the police missed. That's when he noticed the building directly across from the alley entrance. A luxury apartment complex with obvious security cameras pointed toward the street. David's heart raced. If those cameras had been recording that night, they might have captured the real killer fleeing the scene. An hour later, David sat across from the building's security manager, Tom Rodriguez, in a cramped office filled with monitors showing feeds from dozens of cameras. "I remember that night," Rodriguez said, his voice troubled. "Cops came by the next morning, asked for our footage. But here's the weird thing. Detective Morrison only wanted the cameras from the back alley, not the street-facing ones." "That is weird," David agreed carefully. "Did you give him all the footage he requested?" "Well, that's the thing. When I went to pull the back alley footage, it was corrupted. Technical glitch happens sometimes, but the street cameras caught plenty of activity that night." Rodriguez pulled up files on his computer. "Want to see something interesting?" The timestamp read 9:42 p.m. David watched as a tall figure in dark clothing emerged from the alley, moving quickly but not running. The person's face was obscured by a hood, but something about their gait seemed familiar. "Can you enhance this image?" "Already did, for my own curiosity." Rodriguez clicked a few keys, and the image sharpened. "Look at this guy's left hand." David squinted at the screen. The figure was wearing gloves, but there was something dark on the left glove that looked suspiciously like blood. "Rodriguez, did Detective Morrison ever ask about this footage?" "Nope. Like I said, he only wanted the back alley cameras. When I mentioned we had street footage too, he said they didn't need it." Rodriguez paused. "Mr. Martinez, I've been doing security for 15 years. In my experience, when cops don't want to see evidence, it's because they already know what they'd find." David felt a chill that had nothing to do with the Chicago winter. Either Detective Morrison was incompetent, or he was deliberately ignoring evidence that would exonerate Marcus. Neither possibility boded well for his client. That night, David returned to his office with copies of the security footage, the medical examiner's report, and a growing suspicion that Marcus Thompson wasn't just the victim of circumstantial evidence. He was being framed, but by whom and why? As he spread the evidence across his desk, David realized he wasn't just fighting for Marcus's freedom anymore. He was fighting against a conspiracy that reached into the very heart of Chicago's justice system. David's hands shook as he unlocked his office door the next morning, finding his sanctuary violated. Files were scattered across the floor, his computer monitor smashed and spray-painted across his wall in red letters, "Drop the case or drop dead." Detective Morrison stood in the middle of the chaos, his bulk casting a long shadow across the destruction. He was a man who looked like he'd eaten too many donuts and harbored too many grudges. His police badge worn like a weapon rather than a symbol of service. "Terrible thing, break-ins," Morrison said with mock sympathy. "Happens a lot in this neighborhood. You really should get better security, Martinez." David's jaw clenched. "What do you want, Morrison?" "Just checking on you after this unfortunate incident. Though I have to wonder why someone would target a small-time lawyer like yourself." Morrison stepped closer, his voice dropping to a threatening whisper. "Unless maybe you've been sticking your nose where it doesn't belong." "You mean doing my job? Defending my client?" Morrison laughed, a sound like grinding glass. "Your client is guilty as sin, and we both know it. Marcus Thompson killed Robert Kellerman in cold blood during a robbery gone wrong. Open and shut case. Then you won't mind explaining why the medical evidence contradicts your theory, or why you didn't request all the security footage from that night." Morrison's expression shifted from amusement to cold fury. "You're walking on thin ice, counselor. This city has a way of dealing with people who cause problems." After Morrison left, David called his insurance company, then started the tedious process of cleaning up his destroyed office. But as he worked, his mind raced with questions. The break-in felt too convenient, too perfectly timed. Someone was sending a message: abandon Marcus Thompson or face the consequences. That afternoon, David received an unexpected visitor. Elena Vasquez was a crime reporter for the Chicago Tribune, a woman in her 30s with sharp eyes and a reputation for uncovering corruption. She sat across from his makeshift desk, studying him with professional interest. "I heard about the break-in," she said without preamble. "Also heard you're representing Marcus Thompson. Word travels fast. In this city, everything's connected. You know Robert Kellerman wasn't just any businessman, right?" David looked up from his files. "What do you mean?" Elena pulled out a tablet, showing him articles and financial records. Kellerman was involved with several city development projects, including a major contract for low-income housing renovation. Word is, he was about to blow the whistle on some serious corruption involving city officials and police protection for certain unsavory activities. Are you saying Kellerman was killed to keep him quiet? I'm saying Robert Kellerman had made some powerful enemies, and now your client is taking the fall for it. Elena leaned forward. Detective Morrison has been involved in several questionable cases over the past few years, cases where evidence disappeared, witnesses recanted their statements, and convenient suspects were found quickly. David felt pieces clicking into place. You think Morrison is protecting the real killers? I think Morrison is part of a network that makes problems disappear, and right now, Marcus Thompson is their solution to the Kellerman problem. Eleanor handed him a business card. "I've been investigating corruption in the Chicago PD for 2 years. If you're serious about proving your client's innocence, I might be able to help. But you need to know what you're up against. These people don't just destroy offices, they destroy lives." That evening, David sat in his apartment, staring at Elena's business card. His rational mind told him to drop the case, take the hint from the break-in, and find Marcus a competent lawyer who specialized in plea bargains. But his heart remembered his father's broken spirit, remembered every client who'd trusted him to fight when no one else would. He thought about Marcus Thompson, sitting in a jail cell, counting down to a life sentence for a crime he didn't commit. He thought about Keisha, pregnant and alone, watching her world collapse around her. He thought about the system that chewed up young men like Marcus and spit them out as statistics. David picked up his phone and dialed Elena's number. "It's Martinez," he said when she answered. "If you're serious about helping, I need everything you have on Detective Morrison and his connections, because I'm not dropping this case. Not now, not ever." As he hung up, David realized he'd just declared war on forces much more powerful than himself. But for the first time since taking Marcus's case, he didn't feel alone in the fight. The abandoned warehouse on Chicago's South Side seemed like an odd place for a meeting, but Elena Vasquez had insisted on absolute secrecy. David arrived at midnight to find 3 people waiting for him: Elena, a nervous-looking man in his 50s, and a young woman with the bearing of someone who'd seen too much too early. "David, meet Dr. James Wright, former coroner, and Officer Lisa Park, recently suspended from the Chicago PD," Elena said, her voice echoing in the empty space. Dr. Wright stepped forward first, his hands trembling slightly. "Mr. Martinez, I examined Robert Kellerman's body before the official autopsy. What I found, it's not in any police report." "What do you mean?" Wright pulled out a folder with shaking hands. "Kellerman had defensive wounds that indicated he knew his attacker. The angle of the stab wounds, the pattern of the struggle. This wasn't a random robbery. Someone Kellerman trusted got close enough to kill him." Officer Park spoke up, her voice tight with suppressed anger. "I was part of the initial response team that night. When we arrived, Detective Morrison was already there, which was strange since homicide wasn't supposed to be called until after we secured the scene." David's investigative instincts fired. "How long before you arrived was Morrison there?" "At least 20 minutes, maybe more. He was already interviewing Marcus Thompson when our squad cars pulled up. Morrison claimed he'd heard the call on his radio and responded, but—" Park paused, glancing nervously at Elena. "But what?" "Morrison wasn't on duty that night. He was supposed to be home with his family." Elena stepped forward, tablet in hand. "Here's where it gets interesting. Morrison has been working security for a development company called Northside Urban Renewal, same company that had contracts with Robert Kellerman. David studied the financial records Elena showed him. So Morrison knew Kellerman personally? More than that, Wright interjected. Kellerman had been receiving death threats for weeks before his murder. He'd called Internal Affairs twice, saying Detective Morrison had threatened him over some business deal gone wrong. The pieces were falling into place with terrifying clarity. David paced the warehouse floor, his mind racing. So Morrison had motive to kill Kellerman, was at the crime scene before backup arrived, and is now steering the investigation toward Marcus to cover his tracks. There's more, Park said quietly. I've been suspended because I tried to file a report about Morrison's behavior that night. My supervisor said I was interfering with an ongoing investigation, but I know the real reason. They can't risk anyone looking too closely at Morrison's involvement. Elena pulled up another file on her tablet. I've identified at least 6 other cases where Morrison was the lead detective and evidence mysteriously disappeared or witnesses changed their stories. Always cases involving people connected to city development deals. David felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders like lead. This wasn't just about Marcus Thompson anymore. It was about an entire system of corruption that destroyed innocent lives to protect the guilty. Why are you all risking everything to help me? David asked. Dr. Wright answered first. Because I took an oath to serve truth and justice. I can't stand by and watch an innocent man go to prison while his would-be killer wears a badge. Officer Park nodded. I became a cop to protect people, not to cover up for murderers with badges. Elena smiled grimly. And I became a journalist to expose corruption, no matter how powerful the people involved. David realized he was no longer fighting alone. These 3 people had risked their careers, their safety, even their lives to ensure Marcus Thompson got justice. But he also knew that their enemies would stop at nothing to silence them. If we're going to do this, we need to be smart about it, David said. Morrison and his people already broke into my office. They'll escalate if they feel threatened. Eleanor nodded. I've been working on this story for months, building evidence, creating backup files. Everything is stored in multiple secure locations. They can't destroy all of it. What do you need from us? Park asked. David looked around at his unlikely team of allies. I need official documentation of Morrison's misconduct, medical evidence that proves Marcus's innocence, and testimony that will hold up in court. But most importantly, I need all of you to stay alive long enough to testify. As they prepared to leave the warehouse separately, Dr. Wright grabbed David's arm. Mr. Martinez, you should know, there are rumors that Morrison isn't working alone. Word is, this corruption reaches all the way to the top of the police department, maybe even into the mayor's office. David nodded grimly. He'd suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed made the danger more real. They weren't just fighting Detective Morrison, they were fighting an entire network of corruption that had infected Chicago's power structure. Walking back to his car through the empty streets, David realized that Marcus Thompson's fate would determine more than just one man's freedom. It would decide whether truth and justice still meant anything in a city where power protected the guilty and sacrificed the innocent. The Cook County courthouse buzzed with tension as David Martinez walked through the metal detectors, his briefcase heavy with evidence that could either free Marcus Thompson or get them all killed. The media attention had exploded overnight, with news vans lining the street and reporters shouting questions about corruption and cover-ups. Inside courtroom 302, District Attorney Patricia Williams sat at the prosecution table, her perfectly styled hair and expensive suit projecting confidence. She was a political animal who'd built her career on high-profile convictions, and she clearly viewed Marcus Thompson as another stepping stone to higher office. Judge Robert Harrison presided, a fair man in his 60s who'd earned respect for his integrity, but David knew even Harrison couldn't protect them from what was coming. Marcus sat beside David at the defense table, wearing a borrowed suit that didn't quite fit. 3 months in jail had taken their toll. He'd lost weight, and acquired the haunted look of a man watching his dreams die. Behind them, Keisha sat in the front row, her pregnancy now showing, her eyes red from sleepless nights. "All rise," the bailiff announced as Judge Harrison entered. District Attorney Williams wasted no time painting Marcus as a cold-blooded killer. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the evidence will show that Marcus Thompson, desperate for money and facing the pressure of an unplanned pregnancy, made a terrible choice on the night of December 15th. When he encountered businessman Robert Kellerman in that alley, he saw an opportunity. He robbed Mr. Kellerman of his wallet and watch, and when Kellerman fought back, Thompson stabbed him repeatedly and left him to die." Williams gestured toward a table covered with evidence bags. "We will show you Thompson's bloody fingerprints on the murder weapon. We will show you that he was found at the scene, covered in the victim's blood. We will prove that Marcus Thompson is guilty of murder in the first degree." David felt the jury's eyes on Marcus, seeing not a paramedic who saved lives, but a young black man accused of murder. The system was already working against them. When David's turn came, he stood slowly, letting his eyes meet each juror's gaze. "Members of the jury, you're about to hear a story of corruption, conspiracy, and a rush to judgment that threatens to destroy an innocent man's life. Marcus Thompson didn't kill Robert Kellerman. He tried to save him. And the real killer is walking free because it's easier to blame Marcus than to confront the truth." David gestured toward Marcus. "Marcus Thompson is a paramedic, sworn to preserve life. On December 15th, he was walking home when he heard someone dying in an alley. His training kicked in, and he did what paramedics do. He tried to save a life. But when police arrived and saw a young black man with blood on his hands, they stopped investigating and started prosecuting." The prosecutor's first witness was Detective Morrison, who took the stand with the swagger of a man who testified in hundreds of cases. Under Williams's questioning, Morrison painted a picture of a straightforward murder investigation, describing how they'd found Marcus at the scene and built their case around physical evidence. But when David's cross-examination began, the courtroom atmosphere shifted. "Detective Morrison, you testified that you responded to the emergency call at 10:47 p.m. But according to duty rosters, you weren't on duty that night. Why were you in that area?" Morrison's eyes narrowed. "I heard the call on my radio. I live nearby." "Nearby? Your address is in Naperville, Detective. That's 30 miles from the crime scene. You expect us to believe you just happened to be in River North at 10:47 on a Tuesday night?" Williams objected, but Judge Harrison allowed the question. Morrison shifted uncomfortably. "I was visiting a friend." "What friend? What's their address?" "I don't remember exactly." David let the lie hang in the air. "Detective, did you know the victim, Robert Kellerman?" "Not personally, no." David walked to his evidence table, retrieving a document. "Your Honor, I'd like to introduce Defense Exhibit A, a contract showing Detective Morrison worked security for Northside Urban Renewal, the same company that employed Robert Kellerman." The courtroom erupted in murmurs as David continued. "So you did know Mr. Kellerman professionally?" Morrison's face reddened. "That was different. Security work. Security work that paid you $50,000 over 6 months, according to these records. That's almost as much as your police salary, isn't it?" Williams objected repeatedly, but the damage was done. David had planted seeds of doubt about Morrison's credibility and revealed his financial connection to the victim. As the first day concluded, David felt cautiously optimistic. But walking to his car, he noticed a black sedan following him. The message was clear: they were being watched. That night, Elena called with disturbing news. "David, Dr. Wright's house was broken into. He's fine, but all his files on the Kellerman autopsy are gone." David felt cold dread in his stomach. Their enemies were eliminating evidence and witnesses. Time was running out to prove Marcus's innocence before everyone who could help him disappeared. The final day of Marcus Thompson's trial dawned gray and cold, with snow beginning to fall outside the Cook County courthouse. David arrived early, knowing this would be his last chance to save an innocent man's life. The courtroom was packed beyond capacity, with reporters, community activists, and dozens of people who'd followed the case that had exposed corruption at the heart of Chicago's justice system. David's star witness took the stand, Dr. Sarah Chen, the medical examiner whose testimony would either vindicate Marcus or seal his fate. Under David's careful questioning, Dr. Chen methodically destroyed the prosecution's case. The wound patterns are completely inconsistent with Mr. Thompson being the attacker, she testified, showing enlarged photographs to the jury. The angle of penetration indicates someone approximately 6 inches taller than Mr. Thompson, and the trajectory suggests the attacker was left-handed. Mr. Thompson is right-handed and significantly shorter than whoever killed Mr. Kellerman. District Attorney Williams attacked Dr. Chen's credentials and methodology, but the science was solid. David then called his surprise witness, Officer Lisa Park, whose suspension had been lifted after Elena's newspaper article exposed the retaliation against her. Detective Morrison was at the crime scene before any of us, Park testified, her voice steady despite the hostile stares from fellow officers in the gallery. He was alone with the scene for at least 20 minutes before backup arrived. When I tried to document inconsistencies in his report, I was suspended. Williams's cross-examination was vicious, attacking Park's motives and painting her as a disgruntled officer with a grudge. But Park held firm, her integrity shining through every answer. David's final witness was Elena Vasquez, who presented documented evidence of Detective Morrison's financial ties to Robert Kellerman and the pattern of corruption that had infected multiple cases. Mr. Kellerman had contacted my newspaper 3 times in the weeks before his death, Elena testified. He was planning to expose corruption in city development deals, specifically mentioning police officers who were being paid to look the other way. Williams objected repeatedly, but Judge Harrison allowed most of Elena's testimony. The jury was seeing a picture of systemic corruption that reached far beyond Marcus Thompson's case. When David called Marcus to testify in his own defense, the young man spoke with quiet dignity about his years as a paramedic, his commitment to saving lives, and the nightmare his life had become since that December night. I've spent 6 years responding to emergencies, helping people in their worst moments, Marcus said, looking directly at the jury. When I found Mr. Kellerman in that alley, I didn't see a wealthy businessman or a robbery victim. I saw a human being who needed help. I did what I was trained to do. I tried to save his life. Under Williams's brutal cross-examination, Marcus never wavered. He maintained his innocence with such conviction that several jurors visibly softened toward him. In closing arguments, Williams painted Marcus as a desperate young man who'd made a terrible choice, asking the jury to convict based on the physical evidence, his presence at the scene, and the blood on his hands. But David's closing was masterful. He wove together the medical evidence, the timeline inconsistencies, Morrison's suspicious behavior, and the broader pattern of corruption into a narrative that revealed Marcus as a scapegoat for a system that protected the guilty by sacrificing the innocent. Marcus Thompson didn't kill Robert Kellerman, David concluded, his voice ringing through the silent courtroom. He tried to save him. The real killer is walking free because it was easier to blame Marcus than to confront the truth. Don't let this corruption continue. Don't let an innocent man pay for crimes he didn't commit. The jury deliberated for 18 hours. When they returned, the forewoman stood with visible emotion. On the charge of murder in the first degree, we find the defendant not guilty. The courtroom exploded. Marcus collapsed in tears, reaching for Keisha, who had rushed to embrace him. David felt 20 years of fighting for justice validate itself in that single moment. But the victory was larger than Marcus Thompson's freedom. Within weeks, Elena's reporting had prompted federal investigations into corruption in the Chicago PD. Detective Morrison was arrested on charges including evidence tampering and conspiracy. The network of corruption that had infected the city's power structure began to crumble. 3 months later, David stood in his rebuilt office, looking at a photograph of Marcus Thompson in his paramedic uniform, back on the job, holding his newborn son. Keisha had named the baby David. Elena knocked and entered, carrying a bottle of champagne. "Thought we should celebrate," she said. "Morrison pleaded guilty this morning, 25 years without parole." David smiled, feeling a satisfaction deeper than any victory he'd ever won. One case at a time, we changed the world. As the Chicago sun set behind the skyline, David Martinez returned to his case files, ready for the next impossible fight. He'd learned that no lawyer truly fights alone. Somewhere in the darkness, there are always people willing to stand up for truth, justice, and the belief that the system can be better than the people who corrupt it. Marcus Thompson was free, the truth had prevailed, and David Martinez would never stop fighting for those who had nowhere else to turn.